G'day guys. This is just another video based on a question that somebody asked me. I'll just put it on the screen. This was actually asked by the Latin Viking Carnivore, and he actually asked me about if animals fat like lard was not pasture raised, can it be bad idea to cook with? I mean, because of omega-6s. And I basically said, nope, PUFA in animals is safe, low in deuterium, and only in an inflammatory state do we have issues. I'll get into that shortly. I can see I need to do another video to explain this point, maybe tonight. Well, there you go, that's 9 hours before. So here's me explaining some of this stuff. And he actually asked by inflammatory state, I dare to say, are you talking about the Randall cycle? I mean, mixed carbs. Yep. And I said, yep. Somebody else made a comment that that many things can facilitate inflammation. That's true. There can be, radiation. There can be, other types of injuries, exposures to pathogens, exposures to chemicals. A lot of things can cause inflammation, both acute and chronic. But in this case, we will focus on the PUFA side. Now, let me just make something completely and utterly clear. There are two issues here. One issue is PUFA from animal sources, like going to be massive? So if something is grain-fed or pastured or whatever, is omega-6 going to be a big problem? Now, like all mammals, like ourselves and all that, we have conversion methods to convert La to arachidonic acid. So let's see what the literature actually says about this, which is an important thing. So here is a study. So this study is called Pig Feeds Rich in Rapeseed Products and Organic Selenium Increased Omega-3 Fatty Acids and Selenium in Pork, Meat, and Back Fat. Now, the control was given soybean meal, rape expelled nothing, rape seeds nothing. So obviously these are sort of things that are very high in omega-6s, both these. Barley was about the same, wheat was identical, and the control even got a bit of animal fat in there, 1.1. So the offset was this animal had the control had a bit more soybean meal, so more carbohydrate and stuff like that, where the actual rapeseed extract fed animal had far less, about probably about what was about 35% or whatever. But it had equivalent in rape expeller and rapeseed. So from all that product, so that and rapeseed products are very high in omega-6s. Okay, so let's take a look in terms of fatty acid profile. So obviously the rapeseed one, because it had also the selenium, a few other things. It seems to have a slightly better omega-3. That's not the focus of this. But when it comes basically, even though it was fed foods very, very high in omega-6s, as you can see, there wasn't much difference. In terms of statistical difference between the two, there's not much difference. Where MUFA, which is, like the stuff you find in olive oil or whatever, was more than double. You know, there was a substantial difference. And obviously this one here would be saturated fat. So there was far more saturated fat in the control, and the rapeseed one, obviously, because it doesn't have a lot of saturated fat. It's primarily mono and poly. The sort of stuff that it consumed had far less saturated fat. So you can actually see here that, and that is palmitate. Just for clarification. And obviously this is stearic acid. And obviously, again, it's much lower in both of these saturated fats. But that's not the focus, as I said. So obviously, you know, if you feed an animal these sort of things, you will change slightly the profile. You will increase the actual part that you'll increase more is the PUFAs. Anyway, but as you can see, there's not much difference here. Why is this the case? Well, it's, let me put it this way. Like our bodies, we will take a certain proportion and we will convert a certain proportion. It's just the way we function, like all mammals do. The thing that actually really varies, depending on what you're eating, is actually saturates and monounsaturates. You know, when you look within species, they have a certain, you know, polyunsaturated fat profile, and it's usually the ratios which are slightly different. And that's where this other study will look at this. Now, this site actually cites this study, and let me just go to the actual chart. Yep. It covers a whole lot of other things. You know, it's about basically research into grain-fed and forage-fed pork, but, you know, like grain-free. The other one, let me just zoom in a bit here so it's much clearer. So as you can see, when we're looking at this level, we're actually, here's the grain-free, that's the omega-6. Here's 50% grain, and here is basically 100% grain. As you can see, the 100% grain is actually lower than this because it has to do with the composition of a lot of factors. But the things that actually change are basically the PUFAs and the saturates. And the one that actually changes the most is the omega-3s. Obviously, if you consume something with a grain, or will have, you know, quite a bit less. And depending on how it's actually, you know, so this would be pastured. This would be basically, you know, sort of organic or stuff like that, where the foraging part or partial forage or partial free range or stuff like that, it would be that one there. This one would definitely be barn fed and stuff like that. And this would be basically, you know, your industrial type stuff. So it has a bit more in omega-6s, has very little, and the ratios are quite pronounced. Now, when do you have to worry about these ratios? You only have to worry about these ratios if you're eating kibble or eating low omega-3 foods. So the ratios are not important on a carnivore diet. From all the animal products, we get EPA and DHA. We don't need to do any conversion. There's no requirements for us to do any of these conversions. This is the critical part that we need to understand. On a species-appropriate diet, you do not need to do conversions of omega-3s. You pretty much leave that whole conversion pathway to the omega-6s to convert LA to arachidonic acid. And that's fine. There is no damn issue in that. And so I wanted to provide this sort of information so you guys could actually see, you know, these sort of levels. So you can actually see the actual tables, you know, the sort of, find the actual table. Here's the table, you know. We're not talking about, and these, not talking about massive amounts here. So this is in percentages. This is in the actual fatty acid components. It's not in percentages, so it's slightly different the way it's valued as a sort of a, but that's not the important thing. The important thing is you can see there's not a substantial, massive difference. Even here, there's not a massive difference. Probably the industrial ones and that, there's a bit, but not massive. The real big change is here in terms, and even here, you know, you can see the actual PUFA content is very similar. The ratio changes. So the amount of PUFA, you know, so you're looking at here, basically 3 and 5 is a, you know, so you're basically looking about a 18. Here it's 18, 19. Here it's, you know, 16, even less than this in terms of PUFA. Here it's about, you know, 20 odd. So, you know, it's anywhere between your 16 to 20%. And it depends on the cut of the meat. There are other parts of pork which have lower, others, you know, that have got, these are the higher levels when they're looking at, you know, chops and loins and stuff like that. But there are other parts that actually have much lower. But that's all irrelevant. Let me put it this way. When it comes to polyunsaturated fats from animals, they are completely different. They're not the same. You can't compare and contrast an animal-based with another one coming from seed oils. Completely different. Let me give you an example. An omega-3 from fish, deuterium levels, it's 102. Remember the 100 to 130? It's at the low level of the normal range, which is fuck all. That is very low deuterium. And omega-6s are basically just slightly above that. The reason why pork has a low deuterium level compared to tallow, or lard, compared to tallow, or pork compared to beef, it has a lower deuterium level because the fatty acid profile has slightly more polyunsaturated fats. Polyunsaturated fats have lower deuterium, which means they're less damaging to the mitochondria. It means that you're stressing the cell less with requiring to deplete deuterium, any food coming from pork. That's why you see these longevity populations consuming quite a bit of pork. Polyunsaturated fats coming from animal, which is in the matrix and protected. And remember, you know, I do not recommend you cooking it for 35 hours, obviously, but if you cook it, the average, there'll only be trace amounts. And if you're on a non-inflammatory diet, which means that your glutathione levels are high because your insulin is tempered at a lower rate by glucagon, it basically means that you're in a non-inflammatory state. One, because you're not engaging the Randle cycle. Two, you've got more glutathione than a carb eater that has bugger all because they're suppressing from high insulin. So you will be able to electron dome even the small amount that comes through that you cook maybe 1 or 2 hours, and not that I recommend that amount, you know, half an hour is more than enough. But even if you were to cook it for 1, 2, 3 hours, as an example, you really like your pork really well done, even then it's just going to have trace amounts, which enough glutathione which will electron dome and fix that slight small oxidation. Okay, so we need to have a perspective of these things. You know, the other thing that is very important point is, why is there a problem with arachidonic acid or linoleic acid? There is no problem. Who gives a shit how much? Since you're basically not bombarding that pathway and preventing the conversion, you're not going to build up. You will basically convert all that to arachidonic acid. And that is why we find people that are low inflammation have high arachidonic acid levels. And that's fine. See, the omega-6s or the omega-3s and either have a role in the body, have both structural roles, have both protective roles, and affect certain pathways and certain, both hormonal, there's signaling, and there's also certain inflammatory and anti-inflammatory things that are activated. So when people say, oh, a lot of omega-6s are going to increase prostaglandins and eicosanoids and all this, these pro-inflammatory type systems only get activated if your body's inflamed. That means if you've been eating seed oils, kibble, all sorts of other wonderful and nice things that most people eat nowadays, and you're inflaming your body, then obviously you will chronically activate these sort of pathways. You will convert the arachidonic acid into these pro-inflammatory to deal, because the body actually uses inflammation to heal. But if it's, overwhelmed, it gets into a very toxic sort of state where you're actually putting out so much inflammation that it starts doing damage to good tissue as well. And that's how you end up with more senescent cells, more damage over time and all that. But if you're on a low inflammatory diet, then that arachidonic acid just builds up and it can be oxidized. And it's not a problem to be oxidized in the mitochondria, omega-6s. Why? Because they're coming from animal sources. They're very low in deuterium. We're talking about the down to those 100 and something. It depends on slightly the profile and all that of the omega-6s and all that, but they're in that 100 or something. So they're very low, at that low end, 103, 104, 105, it varies, in the combination and all that. So at that very low level, basically, that is, doesn't put stress on the mitochondria because it's so little deuterium and creates really clean energy without a lot of reactive oxygen species or damage to the mitochondria. Seed oils, on the other hand, have something like nearly 2.5 that level in terms of deuterium. And now people are consuming up to 40% of their diet in seed oils. And it's basically the industrial process. When you take even an omega-6 from a plant, it has lower deuterium compared to something that goes through an industrial process. That's why I say processed food increases deuterium levels. It's just the way, the hydrogen bonds are altered when you process things. And when you alter the hydrogen bonds, you tend to actually increase the neutron component in the nucleus and basically increase the actual deuterium levels. And that's the problem of the industrial process, the way it actually works. So all processed foods tend to actually increase by altering the hydrogen bonds, and they increase the deuterium levels of the actual foods that are being processed. Processed foods are shit, basically. Simple as that. And this is the reason why we have so much mitochondrial damage compared to the past. Why people, are getting aging faster or actually having more chronic disease far more than before because of the excess levels of deuterium. So why would you basically fear a food that is much lower in deuterium? It's just crazy. And if you're not basically eating shit to basically cause inflammation to yourself, you're not going to basically, convert arachidonic acid into prostaglandins or any of the other sort of pro-inflammatory markers. It's only in an inflamed body. So in an acute situation, you definitely want it. You have an injury, a sports injury, or whatever, you want it to basically heal the situation. But chronic, you don't. And chronic only comes from eating kibble and other shit. Okay? Let's stop. Fats do not cause problems. They can be converted and utilized for other purposes in a chronic way as well. And if they're utilized in a chronic way, you can actually get deleterious effects. But that's because you've inflamed yourself. The omega-6s haven't inflamed you, or, you've inflamed yourself. And that is when they come into play. So stop blaming the fats for your own stupidity in order basically inflaming yourself. Take responsibility. If you're inflaming yourself, you will activate these inflammatory pathways. If you don't inflame yourself, you won't. And it doesn't matter if you're guzzling down animal-based omega-6s, it's not going to be a problem. You know? So we need to get out of that mindset. Animal foods tend to not have a lot of omega-6s. And we don't want necessarily shitloads of omega-6s either. We do want more saturates as well, because saturates as well, when they go into the mitochondria, they both palmitate in particular and stearic acid even more, actually have a tendency to actually cause what is called a reverse electron transport. It's for another day to get into that and discuss how through complex 1 you get this ROS signaling, which actually tells the cell to create more mitochondria. So it actually allows for biogenesis. That means increasing the capacity, the energy, or the systems to be able to increase the energy production inside the cells. So it's a good thing in that regard. So it has a positive effect in that regard. But at the same time, animal PUFA is not a problem. It's low deuterium. So, and unless you're inflaming yourself, you're not going to be converting anything into anything that can be problematic. So we need to understand that omega-6s from animals are not a problem. They're low in deuterium, and they only basically are utilized for inflammatory processes when you inflame yourself, whether it's from an injury, which is an acute inflammation, or whether you chronically do it because you want to basically eat McDonald's every day, or you want to eat, Domino pizzas, or you want to basically drink shitloads of whiskey every day. And, if you want to do all these sort of things, don't blame the omega-6s from the pig, blame your own, indiscretions and cheats and whatever else that are inflaming your body. So, we've got this really confused situation out there about these foods. And as you can see quite clearly, there isn't much difference between grain-fed or whatever. For me, you know what it is? There is a bit of an ethical thing. I don't want animals, they provide nutrition and sustenance to me. I don't want them to be mistreated. I don't want, I want them to basically, forage out there, consume good and provide good nutrition even for me and all that. Some people at the end of the day, they don't like fish. And so grain-free pork is better for them because they'll get their omega-3s from that. Grass-fed beef is better. I actually like the grass-fed beef, and I'll tell you why, is because I like the yellowy, because it's got more omega-3s in it. And it's also got, it's also got more carotenoids and a few other things. What it does, it gives it a much sweeter flavor. I could actually have it even, like if it's grain fed, raw, forget it. I'm not going to eat it. It just really is, But grass fed, I can eat raw, as an example. So, if basically somebody actually buys, I go to somebody's place and I know it's grain fed, I'll say, oh, can you just cook it, medium rare or rather than rare, because basically I know that medium rare, at least, the fats have been cooked a bit and some of that, the taste of it just, I don't like it as much. I much prefer, grass-fed products because they taste better, and I can actually sometimes have them raw. So that's the sort of difference for me. It's a taste thing and stuff like that. I don't get too hooked up about the omega-6s, omega-3 ratios and all that, because I eat some fish. I eat mostly grass-fed, so I get plenty of omega-3s. So I'm completely satisfied. And how much omega-6s in there, I don't care. Now, for people that are basically don't have my sort of finances or other people's finances, for them, I don't have a problem if they eat grain-fed. Absolutely don't have a problem in that regard, because on the omega-6 side, it's not a problem. And if they are, eating occasionally a bit of fish here and stuff like that, like sardines or stuff like that, they'll get enough, because they're quite cheap as well, they'll get enough omega-3s. They'll be covered on the omega-3 side. And the omega-6 is not a problem. It's just basically, if they're not in an inflamed situation, they'll just increase the arachidonic acid content within their system. And that's what happens when we've looked at research. That's what happens with all low carbers. So we need to get away from this notion. The problem isn't all the research that shows these pro-inflammatory or effects or inflammation or damage to the mitochondria, or basically, high levels of reactive oxygen species and all that. It's coming from the seed oils. It's these damaged oils that are really severely damaged. And all the research is done on SAD dieters. So what they're looking at is this high level of inflammation that is coming from these rancid oils that are, high in aldehydes, high in oxidative products, not trace levels, massive. And at the same time, because of their high level of insulin, because they're eating kibble, not much glutathione around to deal with it, and let alone most of their diet is devoid of both vitamin C and vitamin E, so they can't recycle it, the small amounts that you'd get from animal foods, and they don't take much because they're eating kibble and refined shit. And so that is why they see these things in these people. But somebody who's eating a species appropriate diet and has got a good insulin to glucagon ratio, and your insulin is low and your glutathione is really high, refreshing both the vitamin E and the vitamin E complex. Remember, always it's different lengths, little tail things that are different lengths, and they burrow to different depths within the cell walls and other parts, and in that way they electron dome. When you've got enough glutathione, what does glutathione do? Refreshes them, recycles them. It hands over an electron. It's like a big master electron donor. This intracellular antioxidant system gets upregulated when you're fasting or you're low carbing, and it basically supports and protects. So even the small amount of trace that comes through in omega-3s or omega-6s, they get sorted. So they're a non-issue in a species appropriate diet. They only become an issue in a non-species, and especially when they are sourced from industrial production, as with seed oils, which are highly rancid, highly oxidized, full of aldehydes, and very high in deuterium, up to 255 parts per million. At those levels, when your body, the maximum should be about 130. At those levels, and remember, each hour, if you're only basically eliminating about 19 parts per million. That's with having quite a lot of flesh exposed. And the rest of it, actually, the body has to do it over a number of hours. So if you're feeding the beast like you would on a kibble diet, you just basically, the body just can't keep up with depleting. And you're indoors, slip, slap, avoiding the sun as well, like modern idiots that are eating kibble, which is incorporating in their, the damaged lipids incorporating in their skin, so they burn easy, and then they blame the sun that's never affected us in the past when we're eating animal foods. It's only that we're eating all this industrial poison. And this is the problem. This is the confusion, because people are not seeing, don't have a good understanding, a deep understanding. And that's why I did this, to try and give you an understanding that basically omega-6s from animal products are not dangerous. They are low in deuterium and they don't have much damage. And if you're on a low inflammatory diet, you won't convert them into any pro-inflammatory, products within your system. So That's the take-home message. And that's the difference that needs to be understood by people. Omega-6s are not a problem from animal sources, period. Okay, I hope you people understood that and stop asking questions about PUFA from animal sources. They are fine and low in deuterium. Do not fear food which comes from animals. Anyway, thanks for listening and see yous.